step by step, teachers, students, side by side, a year gone by. Perhaps intrepid, definitely undecided. With ambition we sought from day one to becoming someone. The disruptors, the interrupters, finding their way. First friends, new friends, that we don't know it yet, but lifelong friends. Up against time to feed frustrated minds, asking the hows and the whys, from the what's over there to the scientific discovery right here. Moving from frustration to realization. Games lost, battles won, tears, tension, still in the mind to overcome. Uncovering, discovering, trying again and again.
Remember, break the questions down, read them twice and take your time.
The deep breath. The hold your breath moments. To the big steps that define moments.
Hey Mum, it actually went really well.
And define next steps to the careers and vocations inside each one of us.
Action.
Get the career you want with the skills employers need. Make a Btec work for you.
It's my great honour to welcome you all.
Oh, this makes me feel amazing.
It's just incredible.
Btec Awards motivates me to be the best. Right now, I just can't comprehend.
Yeah, I didn't expect to win it, to be fair.
Steph, I got to ask you first, why are you such a passionate supporter of Btec and vocational education in general?
Because, you know, the skills that you get from doing a Btec and vocational training are exactly what we need for our economy.
You're the key. You are the future. I hope the pride you feel at these incredible achievements will push you onwards and sustain you as you go forward in your lives and careers.
And welcome to this afternoon's webinar here in partnership with Pearson, and it's the Schools Week webcast. The topic on the table today is the Roaring Twenties, a vocational revolution for schools. And of course, in a time like we've had over the last year, it's probably more important than ever to be having this discussion. We've seen, of course, schools close in large part for many pupils, the same for colleges, apprenticeship providers, right across different places. We've had to change how we're doing things, and we've also seen the cancellation of exams, something that most people thought would never happen. So if there was ever going to be a time to rethink what's happening in schools and have the vocational revolution that I know many of you will have been pushing for a long time, this feels the right moment. We've got a panel with us today to discuss how our schools are preparing students for the world of work and what this means. I'll introduce them each separately. They can maybe give a wave as I say their names, because they're going to be with us for the next hour and giving you all of their wisdom. We've got Wes Streeting, MP, who is the Shadow Schools Minister. Cindy Rampersaud will be joining us. Oh, she's there, I hope, who is the Senior Advisor for Pearson. Cindy, hello. Ollie de Botton, who this week started at the Careers and Enterprise Company, where he will be heading up the show there. Judith Fremont-Barnes, who is the head teacher at Milton Abbey School. I've got Jamie Kilner, who is the Senior Advisor at Greenwood Dale Foundation Trust. Ian Parry, who is the head teacher at Meals-Cop High School in Southport. And Audrey Clegg, the Group Talent Director from Coca-Cola HBC. Now, what we will be doing is having each of the panelists speak for a couple of minutes about their viewpoints on the vocational revolution for schools, and then we'll be getting into some in-depth discussion and questions. I think we've just had Cindy step away again from the webinar for a few minutes, so hopefully we'll be able to bring her back into the conversation. And therefore, if I could get instead Wes, I hope it would be okay to ask you to step up in the meantime to give us your 1 to 2 minute comment about this topic area.
Sure, thanks Laura, and I won't take all of Cindy's 10 minutes, you'll be relieved to know. Look, first of all, thanks very much for having me along, especially still relatively early in my tenure as Shadow Schools Minister. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we ought to use them in that proportion, but that is generally not the case in my world and in the world of politics. But you'll be pleased to know at this stage of the parliamentary cycle, we are genuinely sort of listening and engaging and thinking in broad terms about, you know, what the offer should be at the next election and what some of the big challenges are. So it's a good time for us to be having this conversation. We certainly do need a vocational revolution in our country, and that's why the government's latest white paper, as far as we were concerned, both in terms of its ambition and resourcing, fell significantly short of what we think the country needs. But I think the question of the vocational revolution for schools is a good one. So I think we've got to be really clear about what we're asking schools to do or expecting schools to do and what we're not expecting them to do. I sometimes hear from employers, and admittedly, I think the sort of the national employer bodies get this a lot better, but I sometimes hear from employers who seem to think it's the role of schools to produce at the age of 16 or 18 a bunch of fully formed workers, skilled and trained, ready to do whatever the given job is. And that's not a realistic expectation. I'd also argue it's not a desirable expectation either. The purpose of schools fundamentally is to give children and young people access to a whole range of knowledge and insight that humanity's gathered over the course of our existence and gleaned into something we put together in an organised form in a curriculum to give, hopefully, some joy, some insight into the world in which they're growing up in, the kind of world that they want to shape, and also some understanding of the kind of people they are and who they want to be in the future. And clearly part of that is about equipping them for either further study or for the world of work, and giving them both some knowledge and skills that sets them up well to do that. But that's not quite the same as training. And I think we've got to sort of guard against a sort of a narrowing of the curriculum or a binary approach between what we might crudely sort of describe as academic subjects and vocational subjects. For a range of reasons, from the subjects the government chose with the EBAC, the way in which sort of T levels, I think, are in danger of, I mean, they're a great thing, by the way, but I think they're in danger of sort of crowding out diversity of choice and the sort of range of options that young people might go on to study. I think we've just got to be careful about narrowing too far the choice for young people when they get to the stage in their career where they're making decisions about what to study and ultimately what they want to go on to do beyond school. So that would be the sort of the cautionary note I would sound. And the final thing I would say is that, you know, wherever you sit on the sort of the spectrum of debate about the role of vocational education within school settings and the sorts of qualifications that young people ought to be preparing for, it is simply unacceptable that so many children are progressing from primary to secondary school without the functional literacy and numeracy they need to access the broad range of the curriculum. And it's unacceptable that there are so many people leaving school even at the age of 18 without the literacy and numeracy that they will need for life. And so I think we've got to look at this. Obviously, I come at this from a schools angle as Shadow Schools Minister, but if we're serious, as Keir Starmer said, of making this the best place to grow up in and the best place to grow old in, there's got to be a big lifelong learning agenda that recognises that our failure to get the basics right over many decades means that there are still millions of people in this country without the basic fundamental skills they need. So I'm glad we're talking about schools this afternoon, but of course we've got to see this very firmly as a lifelong learning agenda too.
Thanks, Wes, and thank you for stepping in there. Cindy, I can see you've joined us back again. However, I know you were going to do a slightly longer talk, so what we were thinking is we're going to go through the panelists, if that's okay, and then I'll come back to you almost as a response, perhaps, to what everybody else is going to say, and that way it works out really well. Ollie, therefore, you're up next. What do you think about this idea of a vocational revolution for schools?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Really great to be here. And it's really interesting what Wes is saying. So just so people know, I'm 3 days into this job, but I've spent the last 10 years as a head of a school 21 in Stratford, East London. And I suppose the question, and we set up that school with a real focus on some skills and also knowledge as well. I suppose the question was, like, what role do schools play in employability? And I suppose the answer is, they do, whether they like it or not, I guess. So my experience is, you know, we all know the teacher who's had that conversation with you, all that pathway would be good, or we all know they've had a particular experience, and those moments can set children up for a path. So I suppose the question is, should we be intentional about them? And I guess we should. And I think the backdrop of that intentionality going forward must be seen in the current context. So I think it's kind of well versed how young people, you know, will miss out on employment opportunities in a recession. We know about scarring, where young people are furthest from the labour market, the reduction in the hospitality industry. All these things coming together make me worried about, yes, the academic catch up and yes, the social and emotional catch up, but they make me a little bit worried about how we can ensure the futures of young people are really well looked after. So sort of 3 thoughts on that, of which, you know, I don't think any of us are going to solve those straight away, but 3 thoughts which perhaps we can work together on. So one is this. Look, there is this sort of talking past sometimes with schools and employers, which sort of Wes has pointed to. But of course, there's also opportunities to kind of learn from each other. So one of the things that I learned when thinking about the skill of oracy, the speaking skill, was that the work placement put that skill into a really rigorous context. And employers said, well, actually, the way this 15-year-old is speaking isn't quite right. And that gave the young person a real rigor around those sorts of employability skills that needs to be very carefully managed. So that's kind of one thought. The second thought is, of course, I would say this, and I know that, you know, Jamie's trust does incredible work, and Ian's school is absolutely incredible at this. But, you know, careers education, or in its broadest sense, I think is incredibly important to give children real options, so they're not narrowly down one path. They're not limited by anything local to them, but they have their aspirations raised and can make their mark in the world. And the third thing I'd say for employers is interesting is that when loads of employers engage with school, they do it through the CEC, and it's absolutely fantastic. I suppose that the change might be, well, it's not CSR, maybe it's actually about thinking about people who might work for you in the future. I know that happens in lots of companies as well, but is it also about sustained relationships with young people, those bridging relationships that can help those young people really, particularly those who battle the odds, really find their feet in new industries and in the economy. So those are my stars for 10, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ollie. And I can see there when you talked about the future of employers, I can see Audrey's already chomping at the bit, but I'm going to carry on down the list here and look forward to what you've got to say on that later, Audrey. Judith, coming to you now. As the head teacher at a school, how is the vocational revolution for school idea playing out for you?
Well, we're tremendously excited to be having the opportunity to focus on this afternoon, because here at Milton Abbey, we're passionate about vocational education. I think there are some really significant issues that we need to bear in mind. We need to be aware that so much of education at present only focuses on a very narrow definition of what intelligence is. And we've all known over the years people who did brilliantly at school and not so well in life, and the other way round. And I think it's a really important thing for us to say, well, what is it that we're trying to do? I was so pleased that Wes brought the word joy into the conversation so early, because what we focus on here is understanding that we all learn differently, and there's no point trying to say that there's only one approach to this that will work. And I think that there's been so much snobbery in the world of education around what a capital G, capital E, good education means. And I think that if the pandemic's done nothing else for us, it's given us an opportunity to reassess that, which I think is very exciting. So I don't think the revolution is something ahead of us. I think it's something that's very much going on, but I think it has been going on fairly quietly. And I love the word roaring that we're talking about this afternoon, because I think the pandemic has brought the volume up. And look, over the last year that we've been dealing as a world society with the pandemic, how many times has anyone asked, as an employer, has asked someone to go and sit in the corner and write everything they can remember down for 3 hours? It's just not the set of skills that people have been looking for. We know that our employers are looking for people who are whole people, not paper people, people who can come into the organisation and not wait to be told what to do. So the skills that we've been seeing develop in our young people through vocational education are very much the skills that, as a world, we've been prizing in this last year. Skills around creativity, around collaboration, that understanding that you need flexibility. And there's never been a more exciting time, I would argue, to be an educator, because we genuinely, for the first time in human history, don't know what world we're educating our young people into. So we have to move away from these concepts of what job are you going to do? Thousands of them potentially, and jobs that we don't even know about yet. So what we're looking at is educating for flexibility, educating for resilience, and all of these qualities that I think vocational education just does so well. So we're really excited to hear what everyone's got to say today. And I think the last thought I would add to the introduction is that I think too much of education traditionally in terms of careers in schools has focused on hireability. Can you get the job? I'm interested in employability. Are you somebody someone wants to keep employed in that job? Are you somebody who's going to have those doors open and those options in front of you? Because if it's all about pieces of paper, that might open some doors, and I'm never going to argue that those pieces of paper aren't important, but who you are, how you are, is going to be more important than what you want to do. And you know, that's, I think, something that's got to be part of this debate around vocational education.
Brilliant. Thank you, Judith. Sort of turning the volume up on what's been a quiet revolution. That sounds like a really good rallying call for moving forwards. Jamie, how are things working at your school?
Afternoon, Laura. Firstly, can I say what a privilege to be invited to this panel today, and really great to be able to speak after Judith there. That was inspirational, Judith. I really enjoyed what you said. With regards to Greenwood Academy's Trust, I think it's important that I set the context. So we've got 18,000 pupils across 37 academies working in areas of social and coastal deprivation. So we see the development of employability skills alongside vocational qualifications as critical to our curriculum offer. And the reality is that when you look at the vocational qualifications and you look at the skills that employers are needing, you can see the synergy between the two. When you consider for a vocational qualification that there will be strict timelines, there'll be independent learning, there'll be varied assessment systems, there'll be the opportunity to provide practical placements and practical experience. But then for us as well, it's the value of the softer skills that vocational qualifications can offer: leadership, teamwork, resilience, the things that we know that employers are looking for moving forwards. And just to pick on something that Judith said there about the pandemic with regards to the vocational revolution, I think that the pandemic has shown that a linear pathway for education does have some quite significant barriers, because there is limited evidence of a student's curriculum journey or educational journey until those final terminal exams. I think the vocational qualifications offer that performance and that ability to track where students are. The other thing that I would say that we're really keen to do at GAP is we're looking to provide employable opportunities at the earliest stages. So all of our students at Key Stage 1 will have one meaningful employment opportunity before the end of Key Stage 1, the same again at Key Stage 2, and then through Year 7 all the way through to Year 13, they'll be engaged with employers throughout their life within school. And we think that is fundamental to the development of our students, because although we're working in areas of social and coastal deprivation, it's very clear to us that the communities that we work with have specific employability issues, which as a trust we try and work with the students and the families to look at what they are. Some of our big employers on the East Coast, for example, are very seasonal. So there is that issue of transient employment. But really, I think what we're always trying to do in GAP, there's two things we're trying to do. The first one is we're trying to broaden aspirations of our students. And the second one, really around employability skills, is we're trying to remove stereotypes. So we're trying to say to our students that, you may have come from a slightly challenged background, but you can aspire to do, doctors, those types of, dare I say, blue appointments. The final thing I would say is that I think the pandemic, one of the things that we're all doing now is we're working more across remote learning, and we're working across systems and conferences like these. And actually, for our areas of rural deprivation and coastal, we're now saying to our students, because the world electronically is available to you, it's now time for you to raise your aspirations, because actually, if you're going to be employed electronically, you don't need to be living in the city. You can be on the East Coast, you can be in a village, you can be in Corby or Peterborough. And I think that's what I would say on it. We're heavily involved in vocational qualifications, and we see them as a significant part of our curriculum offer for all of our students across our trust.
Thanks, Jamie. It's an incredible challenge. I mean, to have 18,000 students that you're trying to deal with at once across all of those different sites and keep that spirit up. It's an incredible thing that you're doing. If I can turn to Ian, I mean, you're the head teacher at Millscop High School, but you were also formerly the principal at a UTC as well. So I don't know how much that plays into your thoughts on a vocational revolution.
Yes, significantly, echoing a lot of what's been said by the other head teachers and those involved directly in schools. The beginning of my career was very much in socially deprived areas, where we spent a lot of time working on raising aspirations and getting students to have some big ideas. What we realised quite quickly was that unless we actually started supporting students to broker those aspirations and make them a reality, then actually they just became dreams. And very quickly, and from a local community perspective, we were seeing generation after generation where the impact wasn't being had. And I think something Judith alluded to. I think we do have an opportunity, and vocational gives us that, for students to feel that joy and feel that sense of success and that sense of being good at something. Where often a very academic course with an exam after 5 years doesn't give all students that, and some students really need that. My experience at the UTC was unique. I very quickly realised that with all the political challenges that went on with running a UTC, actually it gave me a really interesting insight, because what I found very quickly was that what having that very clear vocational route, and the vocational route wasn't necessarily linked directly to a Btec or a qualification. We spoke about vocational routes for our students who were on a medicine pathway, for example. That was still a very vocational way to go. But what we found very quickly was students had this why, because we were able to really attach all of the additional things, the character building, the skill building, the project-based learning. It became very real very quickly, and suddenly the whole reason that students came to school was very different. We coined a phrase quite early on that became quite an interesting ethos that was a thread through the school. around every day as an interview, and it was this whole ethos and culture that you weren't coming to school to follow the school rules and because we have to do that, actually because you are preparing for what the future is going to hold for you, and developing those skills and values that they all became second nature in many ways, and we had huge success with that model. I think just picking up on something Ollie said, one of the significant things that we're seeing from coming out of the other side of this pandemic is, and I think this is from some of the work we've done locally with the CEC, is we've now got this platform that there is an acceptance that destinations are now really, really important. I'm really pleased to say that we've moved away from that culture of 5 A's to C, including English and math being the only way we're going to measure any school. And actually what that's given us as school leaders is an opportunity to really think differently about our curriculum, really think differently about what is important to our students, really think differently about those things. And through the CEC and Gatsby and things like that, we've now got opportunity to network, as Jamie was saying, and have a kind of shared language. So we now, as school leaders, talking about growth sectors, and we're talking about skills for the future, and we're talking about these things that I don't believe 7 or 8 years ago we were really talking about school leaders, and I think it's a truly exciting time. And as Ollie said earlier, the big thing for me that I've seen in the last few months has been that we are genuinely now part of this workforce planning conversation, as opposed to just a CSR conversation, as opposed to the local employees having to talk to us because they have to. We've now got this platform in many ways where we are being seen and respected as being part of the answer from a workforce planning perspective, for not just locally, as Jamie said, but nationally. And I think we've got a huge opportunity. The real thing that's come out of the pandemic for me, which I think has been fascinating, speaking to employers locally, is that there is a movement away from this idea of a skills agenda to a values agenda. I think what employers are really looking for now is those values as opposed to just those skills. So I think it's a truly exciting time for education, and we're all very excited to be part of it, I'm sure.
Thanks, Ian, and you've teed it up perfectly there for Audrey to come in and tell us whether she agrees. Skills versus values is what everyone is saying from the education side here, actually borne out from the employment side, as your background is in HR and global talent management. So Audrey, what's your views on this?
Well, you may not like my answer because I'm going to say both. However, let me say hello and thank you. I feel honored and nervous being in a group of educators, and I do sit in Coca-Cola, coming from ABB, a big global engineering company, and prior to that, Wolseley, a big supply chain distribution company in the UK. So despite the accent, I'm half British, half American. I've worked in both the US, the UK, France, and now in Switzerland for Coca-Cola. So I will say both, and all joking aside, let me try to build on what the other panelists have said, and trying not to repeat and use time well, because in principle, I am in violent agreement with everything I've heard so far. I was listening carefully to see if there was something I could disagree with. I like to debate and I do like to disagree, but I didn't hear anything. And so maybe I'll try to build and make a few points that haven't been shared so far. The first one, I love the Roaring Twenties title. I'm not sure who came up with that, but it made me smile, because last December I was sitting there thinking, oh, here comes 2020, the Roaring Twenties, and I'm thinking of flappers and exciting parties, and obviously it's been far different than that. But what I would say, the thing that now to me, what I liked about the title, do I think it's a revolution? I think was the question. Yes, I do. And here's why. Because I think, and here's how I give my maybe my Coca-Cola spin on it, and what I've done for the past year, is never waste a good crisis. There are probably things you want to do, and there are things we've all wanted to do. So what opportunities does this crisis give us? For example, several of you mentioned employers being involved in education. I fully agree, because the people that you're educating and training and producing, if you will, need to be employed by someone, somewhere. And so it's not a handoff like a baton. I see it very much part of a circle. And I think employers being involved in having input to education, and doing it in a shared way, I think is critical. That happens somewhere now in some locations, but in others not. So I think in that respect, maybe it is a bit of a revolution. The second thing that I like that I heard, and it builds on what you just said, Ian, and I call it the kind of hard, soft skills. I had written that on my notes preparing. It's the leadership skills, and whether they're skills or values, but the things or behaviors. What I've seen this past year in the crisis are things like empathy, how to connect at a human level with an authentic voice as a leader, the emotional intelligence that is required, talking about, and I'll give you an example, talking about things that have traditionally been a bit taboo at work, like mental health. And that requires people who have a bit, and here's where, Ian, I would say it's a bit of a value, is to be able to see and understand and figure out how to make those connections and how to really work with people with that more human, authentic voice. The thing that I would say too, to your point, if we get into the skills debate, I think also I can't even tell the skills that will be required for our jobs 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And here's where I think you can help the students and the people that you educate, is being able to reinvent themselves. This concept of agile careers or modular careers or careers that work more through gaining critical experiences. That's a concept as opposed to growing up a ladder or in a pure hierarchical situation. And maybe one comment I would close with, and I know you all know this, but when I was reading the notes from Cindy this morning, the thing that came to my mind is I really loved what Alvin Toffler said, and I know you know it, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And to me, that is something that I think if I look back to, is it a revolution or is it the roaring 20s or not? I think part of the people that enter the workforce in the future, the key is, can they learn, unlearn, and relearn? And whether that's a value or a skill, I don't know, but I think it's one to start to try to embed that it's okay. It's okay that there's some things that are different 5 years from now that you need to learn how to do that maybe you didn't learn as a part of your education, no matter whether it's education in a vocational situation or a university situation. But that I think I've really seen this year, and I think that is, in my definition, more revolutionary than evolutionary. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And it's almost like the idea of a personal revolution, right? We have to learn, unlearn, and keep going around. I think that's what Judith was talking about before. It's sort of a never-ending revolution in some senses, especially at the level of the individual. Cindy, you've waited really patiently to come back in. It would be great to hear from you now.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that we've been doing this for a year, and today was the day that my computer decided to do an auto upgrade just as we were about to go live. So thank you everybody for being patient with me, but actually it worked out really well, because like Audrey and Judith, I've just smiled all the way through listening to the panelists, and I think a huge thank you to the panelists for giving their time and for their kind of rich insights into this discussion, because I think they're educators and employers and educators who are close to young people, and I guess the real what I've kind of heard is that context around the world changing, and the point about learn, unlearn, but also continue to learn. Audrey and Wes, you talked about lifelong learning. This discussion is about schools, but it's much broader. I guess for some of the themes and some of the things that you have covered, but the key thing here is that COVID has accelerated loads, and I think and with it, Audrey's point about don't waste a good crisis, with it, it's also challenge what's here to stay and why do we need to act differently. And I think some of that's coming from learners themselves. So we've done global learning surveys of 9,000 learners where they talk about what is it that they're looking for from their learning. We've surveyed parents who've talked about actually their key concern is that their kids flourish in their lives, but within the context of life is career, and careers will keep changing because industries keep changing. I think somebody talked about, you know, we don't know now what we're going to be doing in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years time. So, and that whole point about skills being at the heart of it. But some of the things that I think I heard from the panelists that I think is really interesting and important. Of course, vocational education is in schools now, and vocational education has been with us forever. I think it was Ian that talked about medicine. You know, medicine, law, accountancy are all vocations, but we view them slightly differently. So I think within this context of vocational education and pathways and choice and what we see as the accepted norm, I do think there's something about breaking down that snobbery that I think one of the panelists talked about. And in some ways, what COVID has done is given us a chance to look at what could be valuable for young people in the future in terms of preparing them for life, and that skills piece, which I think probably needs to sit across GQ and VQ, so vocational education and more linear academic education. And we're kicking off at Pearson a review on the future of assessment with exactly that in mind. So I think what I hear from the panelists and what a lot of our research suggests is that you need to prepare young people with the kind of technical skills. You need to make them aware of what the opportunities are and the aspirations that I think Jamie mentioned. But ultimately, it's also with the skills to make them adaptable throughout their lives. And I think somebody talked about Oracy. I'm a trustee of the Speakers Trust, really, really proud of what they do. But actually, that's all about not just employability, it's about confidence, it's about being able to network, it's about peer influence, it's about team, it's about connectivity in this world that we're living in. So I think most of what you all said was I think so poignant and good to hear. I think in terms of the revolution, I think it's more about the acceptance of it, which is again what I think many of you have said on the call. And for us as an organisation, you know, we already deliver vocational education into schools and colleges. We support almost 1 million learners a year who go on and really flourish. And the methodology of our programme is that it is co-designed with employers. It is about the technical knowledge. It is about the application. It is about the skills. But actually, importantly, it's about changing it continually, because it's not going to sit still. I think, you know, healthcare is not going to be what it is now in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time. I think the other point, and I think somebody talked about growth sectors, Ian, I think it was, one of the things that we did last April was a real review of what COVID was going to accelerate and shrink and pivot. And part of what we have a responsibility to do, I think, as educators as well, is to keep having an eye on what some of those new industries are, what some of those trends are, and making sure that when we create our products and our curriculum, that actually some of those verticals are for those new industries, you know, digital, logistics, renewables, so that we're kind of creating the awareness, but the engagement with individuals working in those sectors, but also creating the aspiration for young people around what some of those future roles would be. So I think this is a really, you know, a really timely discussion, and I guess I'm you know, hearing more from the panel is what today is about. But I'm also hopeful that as we move forward, what some of COVID has taught us is that some of the elements of vocational are so crucial, and what we need to do going forward is make sure that we maintain that choice and flexibility in our system, so that we start breaking down some of those barriers. And actually, we really promote DE&I in our economy, in our schools, because that's what will make us flourish, make young people flourish, and adults, but also help with the whole restart of the economy. So I think I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you again for your patience. I mean, you've addressed an important point there, right, which is that there are barriers to this. I mean, we can all, and we have as a panel, I think, spoken positively about vocational qualifications. I was head of sixth form and I was over the vocational qualifications. I was a big fan of a lot of what we were doing, but it didn't make it easy. And so I guess I've got some questions here in the chat channel and some things that are kind of whirling through my head, which we probably do need to tackle head on, particularly in terms of, well, why don't schools do this? Why do we have to be in a position where we're in a revolution? Because if this was straightforward and simple, then we wouldn't need to have the discussion, right? It would just be part and parcel. We're not sitting here thinking about whether or not academic qualifications are important, for example, right? That just doesn't tend to happen. So Judith, I'm probably going to come to you first, I think, because you talked about how this is embedded within your school, but I wonder, do you ever find any of those barriers, and maybe how do you get over them?
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes I've had conversations with prospective parents who will in the same breath tell me that they can't find people to do the jobs they need within their industry, and they can't find the people with the team skills, the leadership that we've been hearing about today, and the flexibility of mind. But at the same time, they want their child to go to get gold standard A levels and go to a Russell Group university and take a particular type of course. And maybe not computing between the two. We do actually talk a lot to parents about this concept of having someone who turns out of a school who wants to be somebody that you would want on your team. I think that's tremendously important. But I think the other area that we've talked to, I think Audrey made a reference to the importance of the openness around mental health in the workplace. But I think another compelling argument around vocational education that really is helping with the barriers is this understanding now of what well-being means and the place of well-being in education. Because one of the problems, I think, with the UK education sector over the last 10 or 15 years is that various pressures, which obviously we don't need to go into now, I think we'll probably all understand what I mean, have led us to a situation where what we're doing is saying we must chase grades. And sometimes in doing that, we are totally overlooking the needs both of the employers at the other end, but also of the young people in our care. And one of the things that we love here is being able to create a community partly through vocational education. I should stress that here we've got a range of both A-levels and Btecs, and our pupils mix and match between them. But the vocational aspect of what we do enables us to have a culture which is high challenge and moderate pressure. And I think that's very important because too much of education is high challenge, high pressure. And frankly, unless you're a bomb disposal expert or a Formula One driver, you're probably not living your career at that high challenge, high pressure end of things. The challenge is tremendously important, and we love having a range of qualifications that are aspirational, that provide that challenge. I myself am a complete convert to vocational education. You couldn't have gone down a more traditional route than I did. My A-levels were in English, Latin and Greek. Marvellous, splendid. Ask me anything you like about a trireme and I'm your woman. But what I would say is that I was in my 30s before I had the kind of experiences that gave me the level of challenge that my students have when they have to put on a concert as part of a team in their music Btec, before I had the level of challenge that my hospitality students have when they have to plan and serve a dinner for 40. I just didn't experience that level of challenge in my education. So I think that a really important way of getting over that hurdle that you quite rightly identify, Laura, is by helping parents understand that actually what we're doing here is something that is grounding our young people in a kind of well-being that enables them to have that high challenge, but with a moderate amount of pressure, which is in their interest.
Thank you, Judith. I think there's such brilliant points, and I wish I could ask you a question in Greek or Latin. Unfortunately, I haven't got any. I haven't got that. I missed that bit out.
Please don't.
Jamie, and then actually, and I'll come to you next if that's okay. One of the questions that's in the chat box here is that's been asked by one of the attendees is around the Tomlinson review. Sort of we're looking back quite a long way now. It's probably about 15 years, I think, since the Tomlinson report, in which we were trying at that time as a country to maybe open up and broaden out what students were going to do. And instead, since then, there's been a real reduction in the options available to a lot of students. There's less vocational expertise and equipment in schools. Jamie, would you sort of advocate or think that that kind of broader approach and going back to that might be worth looking at again?
I think the reality is, Laura, that the more options you can offer a student, the more ability you've got to pick their pathway or help them choose the pathway that best suits their academic ability, but also their interests. And I think one of the things that I would say, just picking up on what Judith said, is that if we're looking at vocational qualifications and we're looking at GQs, it's the language that we use. Maybe if we could get to a stage nationally where we all talked about qualifications, I think that would be a real big win for us, because when we're looking with our parents, often parents will say, well, is that a GCSE? Is that a vocational qualification? Is it Btec? And we talk through that with them, but then we talk to parents and students about how they'll be successful. And I think we're in a situation where we need to be careful that the gap between the haves and the have-nots doesn't become wider. And that's something that we're really, really mindful of, because the more academic qualifications, if that's the best way to put them, lend themselves to heavy amounts of study period, study space, the ability to reference and research, those sorts of things. And maybe we often take those for granted, that students will have the opportunity and support from home to do that. Whereas your vocational qualifications, because of their structure, they allow students to be successful at pinch points or milestones throughout the year. And they also allow students to fail, but then redevelop their work with teacher input. Now, what could be better than that scenario? You know, I often relate to my students and I say to them, you may fail your driving test, but if you fail your driving test, you get to do it again. You know, and these are the sorts of things we're talking about with our students. It's looking at the fact that they can reinvent themselves. They can look at periods in their time where they can be successful, and they can move on through a vocational journey. And if you look at the broad context of the subjects that are on offer in the vocational suite, they are for artists, for musicians, for dancers, for performing arts, for sports people, for cooks, for construction workers. They're all the sorts of things that we shouldn't be saying to students, well, we don't recognise that. That's the value in vocational qualifications. And the final thing I would say on that is that when we're looking at vocational qualifications, if we could get absolute parity with GQs, then our life as educationalists would be easier. And there's already this discussion around vocationals with a terminal exam in 2 years' time, taking them even more to your linear pathway. And let's be honest, all of us on this group would have had a different learning journey in our lives. One journey would not fit all of us. So let's be aware of that, and let's ensure that all children, from whatever background they're from, have got that ability and that opportunity to follow a curriculum pathway that will inevitably allow them to seek employment, get to level 3 qualifications, but ultimately be better human beings and have that opportunity to foster a love. I think that's what I'd say on that one.
Brilliant, thank you. Ian, I mean, would you agree with what Jamie said?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think there is an awareness, though. I think there is something we do need to say out loud, that you know, vocational education comes with additional cost and additional risk and things, you know. And I think if we look back, and I remember as being a young leader, sat in a room having a conversation about curriculum and decisions being made as to which course we were going to do, and it was going to be based on the fact that to put a Spanish lesson on with one Spanish teacher and a load of exercise books in reality was a much cheaper option and a much easier way to control outcomes. The reality is that, you know, vocational education absolutely does all the things that we're all talking about, but there does need to be an understanding that there needs to be an investment. You know, there needs to be investment from a perspective of kit and the facilities and all of those things. There needs to be an investment from a training perspective. You know, I think it's really important that it's not, you know, if we're looking at computer science, for example, it's not a case of taking an IT teacher who's been teaching IT for 20 20 years and expect them to be able to teach computer science. You know, we've got to invest in that from a training perspective to make sure the quality is right. And we've also got to make sure that as a school and as educators, we're investing in what I call the end game. So what are students going to go on to? Actually, are we creating those relationships with local employers to make sure that the whole experience in vocational education is very vocational? Because actually, if it's just a shoehorn subject into a curriculum because it's easier to get the outcomes, then we're completely defeating the object. I think it's important to say it's actually about vocational education that's done really, really well, is really, really powerful. But I think there is, you know, it takes an element of bravery as a school leader to kind of go down that route, because there is additional cost and there is additional work, all absolutely valuable. But I think that it's important we do say those things out loud.
No, that's a really important point. And I think there's a bigger point there, Ian, around just general inequality of what you're providing in education, right? It doesn't really matter. If what you're getting is a sort of cheaper option, then often it doesn't feel good on either side, right? And so I think there are occasions when young people can end up feeling, you know, they look at different routes, and if those different routes are differently funded and differently valued, then that can also play into their thinking. I mean, Wes, you know, social mobility has been a big part of what you've talked about over the years, both when you were in, you know, the union and everything else. So can you tell us a little bit what you think on this one?
Yeah, so this is what I would kind of describe as the sort of the other widening participation agenda. So thinking about what Judith was saying about sort of parents' attitudes and employers' attitudes, and sort of Jamie and Ian have just been reflecting on there as well. The question for me is how do we ensure that parents from middle-class families who went to university see a vocational route as being something they would want their children to do? Because until we've changed that broad public mindset, and employer mindset, parental mindset, there is a real risk on this agenda that you basically determine that you funnel the working class kids down a vocational route, the middle class kids down the university route, and unless you've changed the way we think as employers and as a society about the value of people, what they know, what they've learned, the value of their experiences, we'll end up still staring down the barrel of Social Mobility Commission reports that say that, funnily enough, the levers of social, political and economic power in our country are still pulled by people who've got the old school tie and an Oxbridge scarf. And as someone has got one of those two things, and I've still vaguely got my East End twang, so you might guess it's not the old school tie, but it is the Oxbridge scarf. You know, that university experience I had has set me up brilliantly to be where I am today. And I feel so grateful as someone who grew up on a council estate and received free school meals that state education got me here. The point is that we've got to make sure that whatever your background, your experience at school and the pathways you choose are determined on the basis of what you're interested in, what you're good at, what you want to do, and what you feel you can contribute, and what makes you happy and sets you up to live a meaningful, fulfilling life. And you know, I do think slowly but surely attitudes are changing. I do think in that respect, you know, the way in which the sort of, you know, the T-levels agenda will help. Although, as I sort of cautioned at the beginning, you know, I of course had a similar raised a similar concern or challenge. There are lots of students at the moment who currently do a blend of Btecs and A-levels, and I think, you know, as I say, I don't have lots of predetermined views about this at this stage in the electoral cycle, but I do think that we've got to do something in school around giving children and young people the freedom and flexibility to try things out, to experiment, to be really good at some things and think, I want to do more of that, and also to be really not very good at some things and not feel bad about that experience, but to feel that actually, you know, not succeeding has also been a worthwhile experience and to help them kind of narrow down their choices and sort of pathways. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We're not there yet, but that for me is going to be the bar of success. When we've got, you know, old Etonians funneling their kids off to do good vocational routes, I think we would have won the argument here. And in the meantime, you know, we've got to sort of do our best to accelerate the progress on changing attitudes to vocational education, and also making sure that there are no vocational courses in substantial terms that are somehow not just perceived to be, but actually second best either.
Thanks, Wes. And to bring Audrey in here, because I think some of that comes to the view of employers, right? There is sometimes a concern from parents in particular that employers may look certainly at certain qualifications, or they may only want to have the people with that old school tie in their organisation. And Audrey, you can't speak for all employers everywhere, but as someone here who is working in the field of talent management and also for Coca-Cola, I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's a kind of an old-fashioned view now of the way employment works?
You're correct in what you said. I can't speak for all employers, but let me try and make a general statement, and certainly representing the 3 different industries I've worked for. I do think the 2020 crisis does give us a chance to change this if it still exists. And let's just say it does still exist. If we're not naive and try to fool ourselves, you wouldn't ask the question if there wasn't the feeling of that. So I do think there is still some of that if we're honest. However, I do think that is changing. And to answer your question quite specifically, Laura, I think it's traditional, outdated, and will not serve us well as we move into, let's call it 2022 and beyond, and we figure out how to navigate out of this. It's my personal view, and I would say I can speak now for the 3 employers I've worked for, it would resonate there too. Is my view. I think the one thing I heard that I really liked, and I jotted some notes down, first of all, it's not an exact science. I wish it was 2 + 2 is 4. It'd be easy and we wouldn't need to have a panel here. I mean, there is no magic formula in that regard. And I think it takes different types of people with different behaviors, mindsets, skills, interests, and desires to make a company successful. There's a lot of discussion, and here I take Coke, for example, on diversity and inclusion. Well, it's not very diverse or inclusive if we're demonstrating some of the behavior that we were just discussing. So, you know, is diversity and inclusion the obvious one? Is gender? We can see it. Then comes race, ethnicity, nationality, and then comes education, background, and so on. So to me, a healthy team is one that can debate, discuss, have different views, and the whole richness of that experience comes from a wide variety of people. So I would say that's a school of thought that I look at least the 3 organizations where I've worked at. Is one thing that comes to mind. So at that being said, what I really like, just to build on what some of my fellow panelists just said, I like this part about it's okay to fail. Now that wasn't your question, Laura, but I think that's also a hard one to break. You know, anybody who's grown up in a certain type of family situation or a certain type of achievement or ambition, there's a real desire to achieve, and that's great. At the same time, it's okay to fail. It's okay to make some mistakes as long as we learn from those and continue to grow. And I think that's a piece that I really liked what some of the people were actually saying. And then maybe I would close with this: just it's not one size fits all. And I think all of you have a role to play in this diversity and inclusion of the types of leaders and the types of people that enter the workforce. If not you, then who? So I think that's what goes through my mind and fills me with some hope sitting. I can only do so much to influence what you do every day. You're the ones rolling up your sleeves and really working hard with the students, no matter where they come from or what their background is, that we as employers receive in some way, shape, or form as part of our ecosystem in terms of the world of work. So I don't know if that helps, Laura, or answers your question, but those are my off-the-cuff responses.
It was a tough question and you answered it head on, so thank you for that, Audrey. And we've not got a huge amount of time, but Ollie, I've kept you almost to last on purpose because you were head of a school which did manage this. I mean, you managed to bring together a curriculum that was very different in its approach, much more much broader, thought more about, as you always call it, head, heart and hand, and did it in, you know, parts of London where there are communities who are either considered, you know, sort of middle class parents who are often thought of the ones who might not like an alternative approach, and also communities where there's very, very traditional views around the predominance of English and maths. I mean, how did you manage it? If you can give us your like 1 minute view on how to solve this.
Well, look, fundamentally, in English, I would say reading, writing, and speaking are the spine of any fantastic school, and so you can't, you know, that has wherever you are, like that, you know, that's, I'm sure that I think the heads would agree with me on that. I suppose the point I would make is that quality beats everything else, and I'm not saying we've got it right all the time, but in the end, if you get fantastic practitioners, really well trained, doing good work with young people who are motivated, you can achieve, you can have a broader, a more holistic education. I think the truth is there is demand for it, because if you ask parents from any background what they want for their young person, they want them to be brilliant in academic, of course, they want to do well in their exams, but they also want them to be kind of humans, and they also want them to have the opportunity to make really brilliant choices. So that's head, heart, and hand. So you're never 33%, 33%. But the school that I led and founded tried to think, well, what would it take to be rigorous in each of the other areas, learning from what we learn from academics. And the truth is we were quite agnostic on qualifications, actually. We were more interested in what would get children really, really good quality learning.
So that focus on learning, that's the key.
I don't know if that's the key, but that's what I thought, so yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ollie, and thanks for keeping to time there as well. Cindy, I'm going to come to you last to do maybe thank yous and final remarks, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. And I think the first thing is to say a massive thank you to the panelists. I think what a really rich, fantastic discussion. And what's great is hearing all of you advocate for the importance of vocational. And I think my kind of key reflection is that we need to do more to celebrate the power of vocational and recognise that it is going to play a really important role in supporting young people and adults and our communities to really be successful in the future. And I think, you know, Audrey's point about diversity and inclusion is so true, because I think we pigeonhole, and we have evidence where you have the same household and you've got some of their families doing vocational, some doing academic. So it does cross a cross section of society. And what's really important in this discussion is preparing young people with the right skills and the right tools, and making sure what they're learning is really relevant to enable them to really flourish in their lives and in a changing world. And I guess vocational is part of that now, and will continue to be, and it will happen by working really closely with you all and continue to advocate for it and break down some of the snobbery, I think, Wes, that you talked about, that we need to really challenge. So just a massive thank you, a really, really rich discussion.
Thanks,
thank
Cindy.
you, Laura.
No problem. And ultimately, I think the aim here seems to be we want to get to whatever we'll call it, the massive 30s, at which point we're no longer talking about a vocational or a general or anything else. Maybe it'll just be a qualifications revolution. But you've all been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and to Schools Week and the partnership with Pearson as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Bye.